Hey, what's good? My name is Gypsy Kim. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Have you ever heard of the Daniel Petric case? If not, let me put you on. A 911 operator received a distress call from a young lady named Heidi Archer on October 20th, 2007. She reported that she had come to visit her parents when she discovered they had been brutally attacked. Both parents were shot, and her younger brother Danny, who resided with their parents, was inside the home as well.
What's going on?
I don't know what happened. I just came over to my parents' house because we were going to watch the game. And my mom is shot and my dad is shot and my brother's here.
Does anybody know what happened? Did your brother shoot your parents?
I don't know. I think so.
Later, when investigators examined the witnesses, this is what Danny explained had happened. He stated that his parents had previously grounded him because he had disobeyed his father's instructions not to play a certain video game and had snuck out of the house to purchase the game when it was released on release day. The game he sought was called Halo 3, a shooter game that's very popular among avid gamers. His father apparently had locked away that game in the same dresser where he kept his gun. On October 20th, the day of the 911 call, Daniel reported asking his parents permission to see some friends at a movie theater. This is when he alleged his parents began arguing, that his father had gotten angry and supposedly shot his mother. Danny said that he had heard the gunshot and then found his father pointing the gun at Danny himself as if to shoot him, but that his father ended up turning the gun on himself, and that is how both of his parents had gotten hurt.
My dad was just yelling, just screaming at my mom. Then I heard my dad walk in the room and walked into his bedroom and then walked back out. I ran out there and my mom had been shot. He pointed the gun at me. And then he said he was sorry and then he shot himself.
This report, however, was given after the police officers chased Danny down the street as he was leaving his home in the family minivan, headed to his friend's home with only one possession, the video game Halo 3, which he had been forbidden from playing. When the police caught up to him, Daniel was pacing outside the vehicle, shouting that his father had shot his mom. Daniel also admitted that he had touched the weapon because he had moved it away from his father when he realized that his dad was still alive, and he didn't want his father to harm himself any further. That sounds plausible, right? Well, if you're up on your true crime game, you should be hearing quite a few red flags already. So let's get to the bottom of what really happened here. There's so much to learn from this case, and when I learn about real crimes, I always aim to walk away from the story having learned something useful that could help us to prevent situations like this from happening before things go to the point of no return. So let's see if we can learn something from this case today. So let's go back in time, way back before Danny was a thought in anybody's mind. Let's start with beloved Susan Luvia Sasser, who was commonly known as Sue. She was born in 1964 on September 9th in Cheverly, Maryland in the United States. It is said that she was a passionate fan of the Cleveland Browns. She also attended Valley Forge Christian College in Pennsylvania, and she later moved to Wellington, Ohio, and was married to her college beau, Reverend Mark Petric, who was now a suburban pastor. This is how Sue Sasser becomes Sue Petric. Mark was only about 2 years older than his wife, and he was a Pentecostal minister at the New Life Assembly of God Church located in Wellington, Ohio at the time of these incidents. The family had already been established about 23 years, and the children consisted of 3 kids. The eldest was 23-year-old Heidi Archer, who was now married to Andrew Archer and no longer lived in the family home. Then there was the middle child, Holly Petric, who was only 17 at the time, and the youngest was their son, Daniel, aka Danny, who we've already discussed, who was 16, and he was enrolled at Wellington High School. The family was known for being well-rounded, kind, friendly, and quite peaceful. Many stated they ministered to people everywhere they went. Friends said that Susan was slightly mischievous, recalling a time when she brought a whoopee cushion to a woman's luncheon just for a laugh. She worked as a bookkeeper at Wellington Nursery when she wasn't involved with church matters. Mark, age 45 at this time, was a loved pastor at their local church. Mark was a hunter, and he also worked with troubled youths in the area. People considered him a counselor of sorts, always ready to advise others who needed some guidance. Now, according to Mark Petric, his son Daniel had a great relationship with both of his parents. The mother was considered especially close to her youngest boy, Danny. The father stated that Daniel was her baby and she basically spoiled him. People described him as a normal and happy teen who they insisted had no psychological issues that would explain what goes on to happen next. One of his fellow students said that Danny, as he was frequently called, was friendly and fun to be around. When he got upset, his schoolmates said that Danny would just become very quiet. He showed no signs of violence, although some speculate that this may not have been completely accurate. But in general, Daniel was described as outgoing, kind of goofy and playful. He was known as a fairly average student, very friendly. Fellow church members noted that he was enthusiastic about the Bible and that Daniel could even quote very long Bible verses verbatim. The school superintendent also stated there is nothing that would profile him as a source of violence. Danny was also known as an active skateboarder. He was into drums and, of course, his Xbox. Alright, how do we get to this point when we're obviously dealing with a well-rounded, God-fearing nuclear family who do not seem to have a care in the world? They're loved and accepted by their local community. They are leaders in their community. Their children are good-natured and helpful. Like, what went wrong? Let's talk a bit more about little Danny, who again, at this point in the story, is only 16 years old. This young man got into a bad skiing injury about a year prior to this event and was pretty much trapped in his house the entire time. And this is because as he was recovering from his injuries, he contracted a staph infection. He could not move around freely. He had to be very careful about his movements due to the possibility of destroying his already damaged spinal tissues if he overexerted himself. During his recovery, he found his mental health declining as he was becoming depressed and bored, always cooped up in the house without access to school or his friends. Now, if you've ever been a teenager, which I'm sure most of us listening to this have, you know what that feels like. When you're a teenager, you want to be out and about with your friends. You don't want to be just around your family all the time. You don't want to just, like, his whole life was probably like church. I don't know what they were doing at their house. I'm totally speculating, you guys. But I'm sure whatever in Danny's mind was equivalent to, like, just bored out of his mind. the monotony of being at home every day. Your dad is a pastor. I mean, come on. So I can relate to that aspect of him feeling very cooped up and antsy, not being able to see his friends or go to school. To give him some sort of escape, his family thought it might be a good idea for Danny to find a hobby that he could partake in without having to do a whole lot of physical activity. Initially, the parents allowed their son to play video games to keep busy while he waited to heal from his injuries. They thought Danny would be able to socialize with his buddies online while he's playing his video games. His friend Jonathan Johnson introduced Danny to the Halo games. Jonathan told authorities that Danny developed an addiction to this game. He claims that he witnessed Danny, quote, play them 7 or 8 hours a day, end quote, when Daniel would visit Jonathan's house. If you're not familiar with the Halo video game series, here's a little information on that. The Halo video game is a revolutionary first-person shooter series that catapulted into gaming stardom in 2001 with Halo Combat Evolved. Set in a rich sci-fi universe, the game follows iconic protagonist, Master Chief, a formidable super soldier, and his intelligent AI companion Cortana. Players traverse expansive landscapes battling alien forces known as the Covenant in a gripping narrative of interstellar warfare and survival. Beyond its captivating single-player campaigns, Halo is marveled for its groundbreaking multiplayer experience, setting industry standards and fostering a global community of gamers. With an immersive storyline, iconic characters, and dynamic gameplay, the Halo video game has become a cultural phenomenon, leaving an indelible mark on the gaming landscape. Most of the games in this series are rated M, which stands for mature, and they're for adult audiences, and that's due to the gore, blood, and violence depicted in the imagery of the game, much like many other popular shooting and fighting games. Daniel's father, Mark, soon discovered how violent these games were and how obsessive Danny was becoming over them. Danny's parents unanimously disapproved of the video game violence and demanded their son stop playing them. there were times Danny would promise to stop playing. He would succeed for short spurts of time, then he would go back to his addiction and play again, losing hours of his day engulfed in his virtual reality. I found reports that stated that Danny even propositioned his parents with the notion he no longer wanted to be a Christian, was tired of following their stuffy rules, and expressed that he wanted to leave Christianity altogether in the hopes that his parents would agree to fall back on their demands that he stop playing Halo. His dad was not having it. He told his son that if he did not want to follow their rules, he could just bounce, figure out your own life, bruh. Now, I have heard of parents doing this time and time again. My mom did it to me. My husband has done this with my own son when he was Danny's age, just a few short years ago. And most parents don't give their kids this ultimatum with the hope or intention of their child actually taking them up on it. Like, I'm not saying it's a bluff, especially where dads are concerned, but I think a lot of men realize sometimes you need a hard reality check to bring you back to your senses and get back in the zone of making logical choices. So parents resorting to the ultimatum of asking a rebellious teen to move out may be rooted in a practical theory of fostering responsibility and accountability. By presenting the consequence of relocation, parents aim to instill a sense of independence and self-discipline in their teenager. This approach operates on the belief that facing the challenges of living independently will prompt the teen to appreciate the importance of adhering to rules and societal norms. It serves as a real-world lesson, pushing the individual to navigate life's complexities, make decisions, understand the implications of their actions. In doing so, the theory suggests that this hands-on experience could lead to personal growth, maturity, and a reevaluation of their choices, ultimately steering that teen towards more responsibility and a disciplined path. In other words, don't be dumb, kiddo. Be grateful for all of your blessings provided to you by your hardworking parents. Show them some gratitude by changing your stingy attitude and shape up. We don't want you to ship out. We want you to get it together and stay on track, so when it's time for you to leave off into the wilderness that we all call the adult world, you'll be as prepared as possible for whatever comes your way. The world is a cold, cold place, especially for males, and we cannot coddle you like babies forever, so it's time for you to put your big boy pants on. Unfortunately, Danny did not get the hint. Instead of apologizing to his parents and falling back in line, he did what any rebellious, defiant teenager would do. He actually moved out. Daniel headed to his friend's home, Jonathan's crib. Remember Jonathan Johnson, one of the witnesses in this case? He chose this friend's home. I'm sure it had nothing to do with Johnny conveniently owning a copy of Halo, which Danny had been banned from playing. But he only ran away for about a weekend to a week. Some conflicting reports on this time frame. Nonetheless, it was not a very long time. I'm not sure why he didn't stay gone longer, although maybe his friend's mom was getting tired of this sudden uninvited house guest. I don't know. I'm totally speculating here, but I know if it was my son suddenly having his hard-headed friend crashing on my couch and all I saw was video gaming for hours on end, I'm probably going to be telling him to hit the road. Do you know what I mean? Anywho's, Daniel goes over there, and according to the friend, he reported that he witnessed Danny playing Halo for up to 16 hours a day and only took breaks long enough to eat and use the bathroom. Danny was gaming like he was getting paid to do it. Too bad he wasn't, because maybe his parents would have relaxed a little bit if he was profiting from it or something. I'm just guessing. I mean, his dad was a pastor after all. I mean, that'd be probably really awkward if he was up there on the pulpit talking about thou shalt not kill and video games are bad because they're ruining our kids. And meanwhile, like, the teenagers in the congregation is looking up at him like, doesn't his son run that Halo gaming channel online? Didn't he just buy his dad a new car from that gaming money? What the heezy? Don't listen to me, Pastor Mark. You had it right. I don't know what I'm talking about. Alright guys, focus. You're getting me sidetracked. Did I tell you guys I have ADHD? Anyway, around this time, Danny has the bright idea to just buy his own copy of Halo 3 so he doesn't have to mooch off of his friends anymore. He snuck off behind his parents' backs and bought this game. Then he returned home only to be discovered. Dun dun dun. His father then confiscated the game and he locked it up inside his dresser where he kept his gun as well. So it went into a safe, and in that safe was the 9mm handgun, which will become the weapon in this crime case. Okay, you're following me, right? Good, because I am totally not confused either. So far, the shooting is like a week away from this timeline. Now, we're going to fast forward to a week later. It's October 20th, 2007. A little game I like to play when I listen to stories like this is to imagine what I was doing at the time when these horrendous acts are happening in the world somewhere. Unless you have a diary entry or impeccable memory, I doubt that this date will stand out to you, but comment below if you do remember what you were up to around this time, or if this date is significant in your personal life. Again, the date is October 20th of 2007. For me, I know my son would have very recently turned 2 years old, and I would be living in a small town in Massachusetts called Pittsfield. And perhaps I would be working at a sneaker store that I used to manage. It was one of the most popular places in town for people to buy their Nikes, Jordans, and Timberland boots. Shout out to any of my old customers if you happen to be hearing this. Back to Daniel Petric's case. On October 20th, 2007, the Petric family had a prearranged event coming up in the evening where the family was supposed to get together to watch a baseball game together. Danny's older sister Heidi, who is 23 at this point, and her husband Andrew Archer were planning to come to the house later that night to participate in this get-together. So the game's not supposed to be on until way later in the evening, and I'm imagining the parents were probably prepping for company around this time. It was about 7 p.m.-ish. Mark was the first witness on the stand in court later, and he talked about how Danny came into the living room that night and said he wanted to show them something, or that he had a surprise for them, something to that effect, and he told both of his parents to close their eyes. They were sitting on the couch when this happened. Mark said that when he closed his eyes, Danny shot him in the back of his head, which shocked his wife into opening her eyes. It's reported that she had defensive wounds, shots to her arms, her chest, and along with her head. This proved to investigators that Sue had seen the attack coming. But my word, can you imagine being a mother in those last moments of your life, looking down a barrel that's being held in your face by your only son? Your husband looks annihilated on the floor, and the shock of what's going on, plus trying to make sense of it in that moment, what would you be thinking? I don't think that I could even process that scene in those few seconds I'm sure she had to think about the situation. I don't know. If it was me, I feel like if I had enough time, I would be thinking, is this my son? The baby that I held in my arms after 9 months of stress, hours of labor, and this excruciating pain of birth? How can any mother even comprehend the level of betrayal that she's experiencing in a moment like this? I pray that God protects us all from something like this ever becoming our experience. I pray Sue Petric's soul is in a wonderful place and she is blissfully happy wherever she is in our vast universe now, if you believe in the afterlife. She surely did, and so do I. Back to the scenario. Danny uses that firearm on his frightened mother. She's lifeless on the floor, and now Danny is trying to stage the scene so that none of the blame is on him. So Mark testified that while he was laying on the floor, his son handed him the gun and said, "Dad, here's your gun, take it." And then moments later, he heard his daughter knocking at the door, and he tried to make a noise to ask for help. The daughter, Heidi, stated that her brother came to the door looking really shifty. He was trying to shoo her and her husband away. Daniel would not even open the door all the way. It was like he didn't want them to see past him into the home. He told them things like, "Now's not a good time, come back later, Mom and Dad are arguing." But thankfully, Heidi could hear somebody moaning, and she thought that was odd. Then she started calling for her parents, and she tried to shove past her brother, who was telling them to leave because their parents had gotten into some big fight. Now, the sister and brother-in-law have come upon this grotesque, chaotic scene inside the house. Both of their parents are immensely wounded. Blood is freaking everywhere. It's utter mayhem. They need to get help ASAP. The husband, Andrew, immediately kicks into action. They can see that Mark has a pulse, but sadly Sue does not. So Andrew starts giving his father-in-law CPR. Despite these extensive injuries to his jaw and face, this brave man, Mark, manages to tell his daughter and son-in-law that Danny shot them. Danny is pacing around the room screaming that his father killed their mother, and at some point he even picked up the gun again and started to reload it. His sister Heidi was already on a call with 911 at this stage, and she notices that he's picked the gun back up. So she's yelling at him to put it down, but Danny's not listening. So Andrew gets involved and sternly demands that Danny hand him the weapon. Andrew had to physically run at Danny and overpower him because they were so concerned for their safety. This is when Danny reportedly handed over the weapon without a fuss, and he just sauntered off. He took one possession with him as he called his friend Jonathan Johnson to basically warn him that he was on his way back over to his house after some tragic event took place at his home. So he jumps in the family minivan and he flees the scene. Now paramedics and cops show up shortly after Danny leaves. Amidst the shocking scenes, someone notices Danny is nowhere to be found. So now they're trying to figure out where he went, and they see that the van is gone. The cops are en route, chasing after him. They catch up to him and he's pacing outside the van because the cops are trying to arrest him now, and he's shouting at them that his father killed his mother and he doesn't know why his dad would shoot his mom. So he's concocting this fairy tale that his father is to blame for his parents' demise, and he thinks that they're both gone. So in his mind, like, I'm the only witness, they have to believe whatever I say. You see the manipulation sneaking out here already. The cops take him in and they're questioning him, and this is where Danny claims he fled because he was frightened or something, and that he got overwhelmed by all the commotion and the incident itself, and he's trying to make it seem like he was the witness of a domestic crime. But the investigators were aware that the story smelled like a load of fresh ox feces. Let's fast forward again. December 15th through 17th of 2008 is the time frame. It's the following year, and this is when the trial actually takes place. Danny Petric waived his jury trial to have a bench trial instead, which is when you're judged by the actual judge instead of the 12 jury members that you have to convince in a regular trial. The judge presiding over the case was James Burge. It's reported that there were around 25 people in the courtroom to support Daniel. They were his friends, immediate family members, his grandfather, and even his friend Jonathan, who introduced him to Halo games. We learned that Daniel's dad, Mark Petric, survived extensive wounds to his face, throat, jaw, where the bullet traveled through his face. There are various images of Reverend Petric from the time of the crime and throughout his recovery, documenting the brutality of his injuries. This is when Mark told the court the whole story about how he was sitting in the living room when Danny came in, told him to close their eyes, and he said that he expected a good surprise and was looking forward to seeing it. And then he felt his head go numb and his body hit the floor. Later, Mark would need intricate surgeries to reconstruct his face, his jaw, but thankfully, he hadn't sustained any brain injuries. After being in a coma for 2 weeks, when Mark woke up, he learned that his wife had been slaughtered and he had missed her funeral. He stated that he hated Daniel at first because Danny was the reason Mark's beautiful, loyal wife was no longer with him. Mark even vowed to take revenge against Danny the next time he saw him. He wanted to take him off the earth. Can anybody blame him? However, he prayed to God, asking for help to forgive his son, and then his hatred began to turn back into love. He remembered the Bible mentions a moment when Jesus, despite being crucified and mocked, asked the Lord to forgive his assailants, for they know not what they do. Just a side note here, let me rewind really fast to insert this bit of information about Daniel. He was charged with both attempted murder and murder. In the beginning of the case, his defense attorney asked for Daniel to be released to his grandfather because the family had forgiven him for his crimes. Of course, the judge did not comply with this request. Danny would end up being tried as an adult, despite being 16 at the time of the crime. Though the judge granted him a 30-minute furlough to view the body of his deceased mom in the church, he was not allowed to attend her funeral. The judge pointed out that the long-term psychological effects of what Daniel had done should be considered, and that it would be distasteful for him to let Danny go to the funeral when his father wasn't even able to attend due to being in a coma for 2 weeks, thanks to Daniel's actions. However, the judge did allow Mark to visit his son in jail with ministerial privileges. Because the Reverend was Danny's father, they did not have the level of privacy protecting their conversations that a normal minister and parishioner might have. Yet and still, Mark was able to have more relaxed private visits with his son due to this privilege, and they could have more extensive visits with each other. Back to the trial. Prosecutors said that Danny killed his mom and tried to kill his dad because they wouldn't let him play a video game. Their parents had confiscated it from him previously, about a month or so before the shooting happened. With premeditation, it's alleged Danny tried to off his parents and then set up the scene to look like a homicide / self-elimination perpetrated by his father. Although Mark thought these violent video games were teaching his child it was okay to steal and kill, Danny admitted during interviews that he felt angry that his family would limit his access to the game. He stated that because his family hunted, they already had a lot of guns around the house. Danny stated he didn't understand at the time that he was taking a human life when he decided to shoot his parents. He was used to playing a lot of video games, and at the end of the game, everything resets. These are his words. He stated that he wasn't blaming the video game for what he did, but he insisted that his judgment was skewed and he wasn't thinking properly at the time. He seems to blame his age and naivety. Let's listen to him put it in his own words.
How did you wind up with a gun in your hand?
We always did a lot of hunting and a lot of target shooting, so there was a lot of guns in the house. I went and got the gun from my dad's closet.
Why did you go get the gun to begin with?
I was angry at my dad. He was firm about it, adamant about it, that there would be none of this, and that's the way it was going to be. And so that created a lot of resentment and a lot of anger.
So did you think, I'm going to go get a gun and I'm going to kill my dad?
I did. I went in my room and I was mad. I told my dad, hang on, I got something I want to show you. So I went and grabbed a gun and...
Your dad said that you came out and you said, close your eyes.
Right.
Then you fired the gun. At your mom first.
No, it was at my dad first.
Do you remember that look on her face?
I do.
Did you think that you were just hurting them? Or did you think that you were killing them?
I didn't understand. Like I said, I was a teenager at the time. There's a difference between knowing something and understanding something. And understanding that I was taking a human life.
You were seeing the blood on your parents, on your mom. What were you feeling at that moment?
I'm used to playing these games, and at the end of every round, everything just resets. At the end of every level, everybody's still there.
But you're 16 years old. I mean, you've got to know your parents aren't going to reset after you fire this gun at them. Are you blaming the video game for what you did?
No. I've always taken responsibility for it. I don't try to deny that. I know it's nobody's fault but my own. Did it play a part? Yes, it did. It was the catalyst behind a mindset that caused a murder.
Your dad at that time was fighting for his life. When he finally came to, he said that he hated you. He despised you. Can you understand that?
Absolutely. You know, could I blame him? You know, in light of what I did today, even if that was the way he still looked at me, could I blame him? I don't think I could.
A psychologist told the court that Danny planned his parents' murder for at least 1 week and just didn't want to live by their rules. The doctor said Danny knew his sister and brother-in-law would come to the house later that night to watch the Indians game, and that he planned for them to find the bodies while he was gone from the home someplace. But the plan was foiled when his sister came 2 whole hours early. And they say God don't work in mysterious ways. However, Danny's defense team stated that Danny didn't want to kill his parents until he saw the gun in the lockbox next to the game when he wanted to take the game back. They portrayed the crime as an act of impulse with no planning whatsoever, and put a lot of weight on the depressed state of mind that Danny was in and how the obsession with the Halo game led to his inability to use good judgment when he made his deadly choices that day. He basically presented that video game obsession led to insanity. The defense pointed out that all of Danny's friends and family who testified on his behalf confirmed that he was a typical teen and that he showed no signs of being dangerous. The attorney made a point of how Danny was so out of it, the only thing he thought to take with him upon fleeing the crime scene was his video game. Therefore, how on earth could this kid who can't even think straight enough to take something more important with him when he's fleeing from a murder scene, how could this kid have planned this? Well, Danny was found guilty for all of his crimes, which were aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, and tampering with evidence. Mark begged the court to be lenient with his son and reminded them that he was not generally a bad kid. Mark continued to blame his age and immaturity for the choices that Danny made that day. He stated that Danny told him countless times that he was sorry for what he did and he was happy that his father had survived, and that because he was able to visit him, they could continue their relationship. Mark stated Danny expressed deep pain for his mother and that he missed her so much. He asked the courts to consider sentencing him with leniency so he could have a chance to reconstruct the remainder of his life and Danny could be an example for other young people to follow. However, prosecutors stated Danny had already received a break because he was under 18 and he couldn't be considered for the death penalty. They accused Danny of having problems with telling the truth. They said he was a manipulator and stated these were words his own father had used to describe him. Mark had even admitted that Sue, Daniel's mom, would have let him eventually play the game because she was always quite soft on him, and that Danny knew this, but still, Danny cold-heartedly tried to kill the both of them. So prosecutors stated that Danny had to do a lot of intentional acting to get his parents in a position where he could actually shoot them the way that he did. He had put a lot of thought into the act, even up to the point where the sister came to the house and discovered the parents. Therefore, it is quite clear that Danny did premeditate this crime. Prosecutors insisted that Danny did not show any true remorse and that he was just playing with the emotions of his family members to gain sympathy. When Daniel Petric was found guilty of his crimes, he was sentenced to 23 years to life in prison, meaning he's eligible for parole after the 23rd year. That means he's eligible for parole in 2030. Huh? Which is really not far away from the time that I'm publishing this video.
Well, after I was shot, I was in and out of consciousness. And the only thing I really remember after the paramedics took care of me, I don't remember really anything they did, but just going out the front door. They said I was awake and trying to talk, but I couldn't talk because my jaw was broken a couple places.
I know that your daughter Heidi and her husband Andy saved your life that day. We have
Yes.
the 911 tape of that call. Let's listen.
What's going on?
I don't know what happened. I just came over to my parents' house because we were going to watch the game, and my mom is shot, and my dad is shot, and my brother's here.
Does anybody know what happened? Did your brother shoot your parents?
I don't know. I think so.
That's pretty hard to hear, isn't it?
Yeah, sure is.
You know, after the shooting, you were in very bad shape,
Critical.
critical condition. What was the extent of your injuries?
I was shot from here down through here.
And in fact, looking at you now, if you don't mind, I don't know if you all can see the side of Mark's face, but it appears a part of your jaw is missing.
It was. They rebuilt my jaw. They took a bone out of my leg at Cleveland Metro, and they put it in my jaw. I have a skin graft. It's not completely, symmetrical, but they did a great job.
You were put in a medically induced coma.
2 weeks.
When you came out, what were you told?
My family came in, and they said, Mark, that night Sue died almost instantly, and we've already had the funeral, and she's been buried.
When you realized that your son had killed your wife and his mom, how do you wrap your head around that?
In the hospital, when I came out of the coma, all I did was think about that, and I could not get the pictures out of my mind. I was really, it's like being tortured. And The more I thought about it, the more I became angry. I just became very, very angry. In fact, so angry that everybody that came to visit me said, "How's Danny doing?" I said, "Don't talk about him. I don't want to hear about him. I hate that kid. He killed my wife, his mom." I was really angry.
This case has brought a lot of controversy over violent video games to the public eye. Researchers found that there is no relationship between violent video games and aggressive behaviors in teens. However, it can be argued that gaming could lead to a disorder characterized by addiction to playing video games. It's more likely that people who commit violent acts based on things they consume in the media usually have an underlying reason and personality disorder or abnormal psychologies that contribute to those actions, although the catalyst for taking real action could be linked to some media exposures. My son is 18 right now, and I asked him, when was the first time you played a video game that was violent and you knew that it was violent? He answered age 8. I asked if he understood the difference between an on-screen death of characters versus real life at that time, and he said yes. He also stated that at 16 he knew that there was a difference. Here are some of the games that my son mentioned playing throughout the entirety of his high school years: Battlefield 4, GTA 5, Watch Dogs, Apex Legends, For Honor. And according to my son, these are extremely violent games with a lot of gore, death, blood, and all kinds of scary things that I guess could be considered a bad influence, like Halo 3. Like Danny, my son was a good student in school. He grew up in a religious home. He has another sibling. He didn't get in trouble at school, and he's well loved by his friends. He's considered respectful and playful and is working towards gaining his own independence right now. But unlike Danny at 17 years old, my son's solution to gaining more independence was to become more responsible. He got his first job at a restaurant, working part-time. He started saving up money to pay for his own entertainment, including video games and school dances, even his own graduation cap, gown, pictures, the whole nine. He contributes financially and with his service to our household. He helps us to care for and guide his younger sister. So why is my son not blaming video games for tragic decisions that he has to deal with the consequences of long term? Because the problem is not the video games. The problem lies in how each individual thinks and rationalizes their experiences. One must be accountable for one's actions, even if we make really, really bad mistakes. I'm just going to use myself as an example because I can only speak for myself. My parenting style is to not sugarcoat reality when dealing with my kids, within reason to fit their appropriate age groups. But if they do have questions, I try to respond with real life examples so that they are better prepared for tough situations that they might be facing one day. When they make a mistake, I explain why they need to face the consequences and how to avoid making those same mistakes in the future. I acknowledge that they might find it hard to accept that there are rules to follow, but that all of us must follow rules in society, even grown-ups, and rules aren't bad. It helps to keep order and to make things more fair for everybody. If we all just did and took whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, we would very likely get ourselves in trouble or end up harming other people in the process. As easy as it is to blame a video game for one's horrendous decisions, I think that it's a bit immature to take all of the blame off the defendant in a case like this. Now, I'll say that their age does allow for a bit of leeway in a case like this one. I would think a life or a death sentence is both a bit too harsh, but then again, what if this horribly thought out plan had succeeded and both of the parents had been taken off the earth? What an absolute waste and tragedy that would have been. And we have to consider all of this when evaluating these cases. Would the family still have been behind supporting Danny if both of the parents were executed? I think it would make sense to keep characters like Dan Petric behind bars for a very long time. A lot of time to truly reflect on their actions well into at least his 30s. And upon release, if parole plays a part in his imminent freedom, I would mandate him to have extensive ongoing therapy, would require frequent check-ins with probation or some other authorities long term. I would have this hypothetical convicts I'm talking about here, participate in community service work extensively to repay society for the life lost and the other lives that are forever traumatized from this event, not only to make an example of this person, but also to prove that some criminals can be rehabilitated if it is indeed true that they are remorseful for what they did and they do the work that is needed to get better. Murder is not a minor crime. It is the most heinous act that a human can ever impose on another one. This is an act in which you deem yourself to be God the moment you take that person's life. The victim has no choice in the matter. You must be held accountable for this act as you would want anybody else to be held accountable for taking your life unjustly. And of course, there are exceptions to this rule for victims of certain types of abuse or in true self-defense cases. But nonetheless, Mark Petric says that he knows his son has true remorse and would never do anything like this ever again. All of Danny's family has forgiven him for his actions and continues weekly visits with him. I think this is a good thing, and it shows what a loving family this kid really did come from. I think it's a reminder for all of us not to take our loved ones and supporters for granted and to treat them kindly despite petty disagreements and conflicts. Nothing is solved with violence, but we can make monumental changes when we use constructive, purposeful words. Tell me in the comments, what were some lessons you learned while listening to this story? What questions popped into your mind? How do you truly feel about the verdict of the trial in this case? Mark Petric continues his fight against video game violence and speaks publicly on the matter to this day. I commend him for finding something positive to focus his passions on after this ordeal. It's such a tragedy, but I have to say, despite my sympathy for the situation and the struggles of his family, I do not agree with his notion that his son's violent actions were solely the fault of the video game exposure. As a pastor, I do understand how he would be wanting to forgive and forget and kind of wipe Danny's slate clean. But if we blame video games for these types of crimes instead of the improper use of free will, which God gave to us, I think the world would become a much more dangerous place. I mean, I've starved my share of pixel babies in the Sims 4 game. No matter how much joy I get out of watching virtual children starve and get taken away by the foster care peoples, I could not justify actually doing something like that in real life to a real kid. That's infuriating to even think about. But that's it from me. What do I know? I'm just some lady on the internet. Thank you so much for chilling with me here this time as we went over the facts of this case. They call me Gypsy, and I hope to see you soon in the comments section. Remember to leave me a like so that more people like you can find me in the sea of videos here at YouTube land. Catch you in the next one. Stay safe, stay alive. You're never lost if you know where you're going. Ta-ta.